a situation where people voted massively for a particular government. The government comes to office and instead, oppresses the people, ensures that the inequality gap is widened. That same government that was popular before it came into office leaves office and leaves Nigerians in abject poverty. And so why should they come out to cast their vote? So the fundamental reason why people are not showing up is simply because democracy has not delivered.
Is governance rocket science, as many are wont to say? Beyond the din and the inevitable noise of the politics, what are the big issues confronting us collectively today as Nigerians? Introducing the Big Issue Show. This is the show where we analyze big-ticket governance matters that affect all and sundry across the 36 states of the Federation and, of course, the FCT. Join me on all Mswitch media platforms on YouTube, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Hello, everybody, and welcome once again to The Big Issue. This is the show where we examine big-ticket governance matters that affect all and sundry across the 36 states of the Federation and, of course, the FCT. My name is Buchi, and on today's show, we will be talking about elections, electioneering, and, of course, the democratic process. All of this and more in full detail right after this. You're welcome back to The Big Issue. My name is Buchi, and I'm in the studio today with Samson Itodo, who is the founder, CEO, MD, Samson of Yaga Africa. Hello, Samson. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Your musician has been, constantly following the election process, the politicking process, the entire democratic process for a while now. Over 10 years, is it?
16 years.
Okay, 16 years.
Yeah.
And now you've expanded your remit. Now it's no longer just Nigeria. It's gone beyond Nigeria. You're now observing elections and following the electoral conversations in different parts. I know that you monitored the Sierra Leonean elections that just concluded. What's your take, without going deeply into details, what has been your experience of watching and following elections on the continent?
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I think that there are three major trends that you see across the continent. The first is elections are now a recurring decimal within our region, and that's Africa region. And so countries conduct elections year in, year out. But then these elections are witnessing a decline in their quality, even if you have citizens showing up in some cases, and in some cases you have low turnout of voters. So we have regular elections, but again, the quality of governance is depreciating. So that's the first trend. The second trend is within the entire election management ecosystem. That's the problem or the challenge of who decides who gets to vote and when is a fundamental problem. It's one big issue. So when you talk about Sierra Leone, there were issues relating to voter identification. If you come to Nigeria, there are also issues relating to voter identification. So who has the power to determine, who gets to vote at the end of the day? Do you need some form of identification, to vote even if you're over 18? So that's one. The third one deals with results management. And Nigeria grapples with issues around results management. Sierra Leone is grappling with that. Kenya also grappled with that. So it's peculiar to regions where you have democratic authoritarians who want to seize political power at all costs at the expense of their people.
Let's speak on one of the trends that you say you've seen emerging. Who identifies who gets to vote? So let's talk about that balance. Like you said correctly, Nigeria did struggle with voter registration, voter ID.
Are still struggling.
And where exactly what would you say is the reason for the bottleneck? So, is it more a capacity issue in terms of INEC? Is it a willingness issue to make things to maybe not make things as free as possible if you're going to delve into the realm of conspiracy theories a bit. Where exactly is the bottleneck?
I think first there are political, there are economic, and there are social dimensions to this discussion. But I think let's focus on two things. The first one is the right to vote, and the right to vote is a constitutional right that is given to citizens. It's quite precious because the process of elections and electing leaders is sacred to any citizen who has attained a certain age, because it gives you the opportunity, to decide and express your sovereign power, because government derives its legitimacy from the people. And one way people transfer power to government is through elections. So no government in the world can claim to be legitimate if it is not elected from the people. And so that process of who decides, it's critical. And so when you look at, Nigeria and across Africa, is this point about the database of those who qualify to register and to vote, because the law is clear across board that you need to turn 18 before you can register, and then before you can vote. I say this often, that Nigeria is one country where it's very expensive to be a registered voter in Nigeria. First, you show up to register, you show up to collect your PVC, and then you now show up to vote. That's the ideal time frame, or the ideal process. But we know people show up more than 5 or 10 times and they don't even get their PVCs. So first is, there is need to harmonize our national identity database. The good thing is you have the Nigeria Identity Management Commission. It says we have over 100 million people on our database. This whole bifurcation or duplication of databases needs to stop, and we've got to consolidate. So INEC can extract the voters register from the National Identity Management Commission, or that system, because it's our national database. That way, once people turn 18, they can just show up and cast their vote. The second thing is these PVCs have lost their value and their time because of the new technology INEC introduced, which is the BVAS. Currently, you can actually cast your vote without a PVC, because your biometric features your biometric information are now contained on the BVAS and not the smart card reader. So we don't need the PVC. And we've called on INEC for subsequent elections. We don't need a PVC. As long as you're a Nigerian, you've got a means of identification. You've got your driver's license, you have your international passport. If you show up at the polling unit and your name is found on the register for the polling unit, you should vote. So those are some of the issues and new approaches that Nigeria needs to adopt. But I think this current model of voter registration and PVC collection is obsolete and does not guarantee the right to vote.
Okay, that's actually quite insightful. So let's say now I, Buchi, the voter, I've managed to jump through all of these hurdles, all of these issues that mean that it's difficult for me to get my PVC and the right to vote. But I get it, right? And then I don't come out to vote on that day, because the 2023 election has proven or has shown itself to be the one with the lowest turnout since the latest dispensation. In fact, we've seen a steady decline in the turnout figures. In 2015, it was 53.7%. In 2019, it was 34.75%. In 2023, it's about 29%. And if you're comparing it against the 87 million collected PVCs, if you compare against the over 90 million registered voters, then it's about 26.something%. And what I found was not just that it's the lowest that we've seen for Nigeria, it is also it has the infamous honor of having beaten Zimbabwe in 96, the lowest election turnout in Africa. What exactly, I don't want to shape this particular question. I don't want you to give your thoughts on the low voter turnout that we have that has been especially the trend.
So we've been studying this trend for years. And when I hear people make the argument that perhaps because of the introduction of the beavers, this is the actual, turnout rate for our election, I chuckle. There are three main reasons why people don't show up to vote. The first one is the quality of governance. People don't see the need to show up to vote because at the end of the day, the people who emerge from those elections don't address the basic problems that people face. So they can't connect, their state of being and well-being and livelihoods to participate in an election. Because how do you explain a situation where people voted massively for a particular government, the government comes to office and instead, oppresses the people, ensures that the inequality gap is widened? That same government that was popular before it came into office, leaves office and leaves Nigerians in abject poverty. How do you explain the fact that an average voter who sits out there, who had hope that when he votes for a credible political party and a credible individual, that when they get into office, they will take decisions that are better to their life? What they have seen is that it doesn't actually play out that way. And so why should they come out to cast their vote? So the fundamental reason why people are not showing up is simply because democracy has not delivered. And if democracy starts delivering, then it's going to inspire people and people are going to show up to cast their vote. But despite the failure of this species of democracy that we practice in our own context to deliver the dividends and its promise to people, you still see citizens resilient. You see them determined to cast their vote, and that's what you saw in the 2023 elections. The second reason why people actually don't show up to vote is a lack of trust in the electoral process. And there's this hangover, of distrust in past elections managed by the likes of Professor Morris, where elections, people are still standing on the queue, results are being announced and winners return. But all of that, to a large extent, have been eliminated within our system. And so people have this distrust that their vote will not count. And you can't blame people. Because it's in this country, we've seen where votes count, but the people who determine the final votes are the unelected judges that you have in our courts. Because we're all witnesses to the fact that we've got some individual who came forth in an election and became the winner of the election just because the Supreme Court declared them a winner. I think when things of that nature actually happen, it's an insult on the sensibilities of the Nigerian for whom this entire democratic process seeks to serve. How do you explain, even in Bielsa, right, where a popular candidate won, but the Supreme Court, in their interpretation, due to some, issues with the deputy governorship candidate of one of the parties, decided to rule in the way that it ruled. So the man on the street and the woman on the street cannot actually understand the kinds of judgments that come out of our court. So all that informed by the way the system is being run. I think the third major reason why people are not showing up is just the hiccups, the obstacles, and the challenges and the difficulties of being a Nigerian voter. And this country is a country where we do not respect, we do not cherish, and we do not adore the Nigerian voter. The only time a voter is appreciated is on the day of election. After that, you've got a system that completely shuts them out of governance. And so for them, they just feel there's no point because after all, what is government delivering to them? Is it security? No. They're responsible for their own security. Say water. So what you've seen is a creation of shadow states everywhere and there, and people are just, building their own government within their own enclaves because government has lost it and has failed in its responsibility, to deliver to the people.
I want to ask a question as to what the way forward for, addressing this particular one is. But I also want to explore what you think about the sharp difference between federal elections and state elections. Yes, you've given very valid reasons for no turnout, in elections. But there is an even sharper drop when you compare the presidential elections to gubernatorial elections. So most times, even in the same cycle, or even off cycle, for example, the governor of Anambra State was elected with less
actually 10%
of the registered voters.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look at situations like that, why is it different in terms of our thinking, or is this more a mental issue or a process issue?
Well, I think it's just sociological. First, there's what is called voter fatigue. Now, it's not even if, and I say this advisedly, we need to appreciate the Nigerians who show up, even in their small numbers, when they show up to vote. Because in actual fact, the way the country is run, the way the states are run, it's not inspiring at all. And so for those who express hope that through exercising their right to vote, that some accountable, responsive, and transformative leadership will be the outcome of that, we need to give them credit, because it's not easy. If you go across the country and you speak to people and you see the disappointment, that they have. So it's not easy. But for those ones who actually show up and you look at the dynamics, federal elections, it's actually not cast in stone that there's actually a wide disparity. In some cases, for state elections, the turnout is higher, depending on the competitiveness and the popularity of the candidates.
Like Lagos.
Like Lagos is one of those states. Kano is also one of those states. Rivers, it's one, although Rivers in the last election had a very poor turnout.
16.
For elections. So it oscillates. So the issue is, for the state level elections, the closest to the people. By the way, it's more competitive than the federal elections. For off-cycle elections, people are already tired, and they don't think that it will make any difference. So you can see that turnout at that level. But then there's also a bigger issue, which is, if we look at our voter register, do we really have 93 million people on the register? And my sort of position on that, and a principled one, and also YIGA Africa's position, because we've studied this, we've audited voters register. We don't have 93 million registered voters in Nigeria. Our register, even though it has some level of credibility and accuracy, has got dead people, double registrants and multiple registrants. They are unqualified persons who are on that register. And this is why, at YIGA Africa and also civil society, we've called for an audit of the voters register. And trust me, if we audit the voters register, you would see that dead persons as well as unqualified persons, are in the register. And once you eliminate them or null their records, you're not going to have 93 million. So maybe as we talk about, the voter turnouts, the big question is, how do we have up to 93 million registered voters? So I think overall is, and you asked the question about how we tackle this, government just needs to deliver to the people. And the point is central to this discourse around legitimacy. And the only way you can be legitimate is if you evolve and emerge, from the popular choice of the people. That a lot of people show up to cast, their vote at elections. And we must make elections, easy, simple, and interesting for people to participate. INEC itself needs to uphold, the principles of integrity and the management of elections. And then security needs to be guaranteed as well, because in the build-up to the elections, the 2023 elections, there's, multidimensional and multi-layered and leveled insecurity that actually put fear on the minds of people and prevented them from voting.
I want to take you on something you said previously about the judges and the Supreme Court and decisions taken. And so I'm asking because it's also a sentiment that has been shared quite publicly that more and more we are seeing Supreme Court judgments or court judgments annulling elections and, in their words, choosing leaders. Is that such a bad thing? The severe litigation of our election process, does that not in some way make sure that people are dotting their I's and crossing their T's and improving the process itself?
No, I think it's the whole concept of judicial review. What is judicial review? Because it's a cornerstone of democratic practice. That you have powers, governmental powers, distributed across different institutions. And one of them, which is the judiciary, has a responsibility of interpreting our laws, but also, reviewing the actions taken by, other individuals or those arms of government. But also tied to that, it's also the whole notion and the concept of the rule of law, that we submit to a particular institution to review our actions and deliver and take decisions and deliver judgments in a way that, one, deepens the rule of law, the practice of it, but also fosters justice. And to do so, there are certain fundamental principles that must be upheld. Because the whole concept of, litigation is the fact that there are democratic values that are often in conflict. And so when the courts take decisions, and rather than respond to the questions and situate cases within the broader context of democracy and what's the practice and the values that shape our democratic process, they look at this from a narrowed sense, and they do so intentionally because of the pressure as well as the political interference, with judiciary. As an election law teacher, one of the problems that I have is the fact that when I speak with my students and you hear them make statements about judges, it breaks my heart, because at the end of the day, it looks like we are all on our own in this country. Now, which other institution can you trust to deliver judgment and justice? If a senator, a former senator, can make the statement he made in the hallowed chambers of the National Assembly, making references to how his wife, who was what? A president of the Court of Appeal, assisted as politicians. They think citizens are not watching? Yeah, they are watching. And so there's no justice at the end of the day. How do you explain how politicians bribe judges and judges issue all sorts of contradictory and conflicting judgments, and you don't see sense? Even a common man and a common woman on the street, if given the opportunity, to adjudicate upon a man, they would. Then they seek. And so when you throw, facts and the truth out of the window, just because of the pittances, I call them pittances, that politicians give, it's really sad. So first, you have a litigious society, no doubt. We always go to the court. And the question is, why do politicians always go to the court? Do they go to the court believing that they will obtain justice?
Because if you've not been known for fairness in the way that you govern, how do we believe that you're going to the court because you're looking for fairness?
Because you've got a problem with your politics. That is zero-sum attitude towards our politics is responsible for this deviant political behavior that we see across, and it straddles all across our political system. First, you have an individual who, one, is not popular within their constituency, goes on, acquires resources, bribes his way or her way to one, securing the nomination of the parties. Go and check the candidate recruitment process in political parties. It's about the highest bidder and the highest spender.
And that's actually something I plan to take you on, a full conversation on the internal democracy of political parties. But I think that we're at the point where we should take a very quick break. And when we come back, our conversation on elections, electioneering, and our democratic process will continue. My guest today is Samson Itodo, and I hope you've been enjoying the conversation. More soon. Welcome back to The Big Issue. My name is Buchi, and I have been here in the studio with Samson Itodo of Yaga Africa. We've been having a very, hopefully, insightful conversation around elections, electioneering, and our democratic process. Samson, you're taking me into territory that I actually was hoping that would get to, which is the internal democratic process of political parties. We were already talking about recruitment of candidates and whatnot. This is over 24 years since we started this democratic dispensation. How would you compare the progress or lack thereof of the internal democracy in political parties that we've seen?
I think we've gone from one extreme of worse to, I don't know if there's something even worse than worse.
So we regress.
Yeah, I didn't want to use that complex term of regression, but increasingly for 25 years, if you look at the health of our political parties, most of them are not only sick, they're either suffering from, I think malaria is putting it lightly, a lot of them have suffered from terminal diseases that had led to their extinction. And we got to a point where, the Constitution had to be amended, giving INEC the power to deregister political parties who do not secure at least, even if it's one seat in a local council election or a councillorship. And that's what Section 225 of the Constitution actually provides. Because you look at what's a political party, what you have in our own context, and it's not peculiar to Nigeria, is these institutions that operate as special purpose vehicles for only presenting candidates and securing power. But political parties are not just about contests for power. They're actually a platform for the aggregation of social interest. And if you check, all the parties, how many parties, I'm not saying all of them, there are some who at least operate like political parties that advance social interest. And it's not just the interest of the hegemons that have captured the structure of the political parties, but it's about the interest of the people. So that's one. The second issue is how many political parties in Nigeria have accurate, updated register of their members. Give me one political party. Maybe you can say one or two that I know, and those ones are actually, forgive my classification, as smaller parties. They don't have representation in National Assembly. But the two political formations that shape, our electoral politics, they don't have. One of the parties said they had, 14 or 16 million members. When the Electoral Act was amended, compelling political parties to submit lists of their members, we saw how a lot of them were running helter-skelter. And not all of them actually fulfilled that condition of submitting their register of members. Because you have an attitudinal problem on the part of our political class. You've got a political class that doesn't believe in the rules of the game, and so they don't comply. You've got a political class that loves the spoils of power, but they are not ready to abide by the values and the ethos of securing, that power. You also have a class of people who do not care about the interest of the people. And I'm not generalizing. There are political parties and politicians that stand out, and we recognize and we celebrate them. But trust me, majority of the members of this political class are so predatory in nature that they do not have respect, for rules. And you see that reflect in the political party. When you say internal democracy within parties, the first thing you need to look at is how are the leaders of the parties elected or selected. And what you see within parties, forget all the window dressing in form of conventions. A lot of those, are just to fulfill our righteousness. And so there's no democratic, people-centered and open processes of leadership recruitment within the parties. The second is how are decisions made within the political parties? What role do members of those political parties play in shaping the decisions of the parties? Who decides who becomes a delegate? Do members of parties make inputs into constitution? Do they make inputs into program design? And then lastly is how candidates are selected. And that is, the hotbed of politics, especially within political parties. And so candidate selection processes are really, really deficient when it comes to, the principles of transparency, the principles of openness, the principles of accountability, the principles of fair play. You don't provide an opportunity for women, youth, other people, and you see the whole process of candidate selection is captured within the political parties because you have individuals who want their anointed candidates and they don't want to subject their anointed candidates to test, by members of the parties. So these are some of the issues. And what is really troubling is the fact that after candidates emerge, they are unlawfully substituted. In fact, in the last election, the number placeholder candidates, you had situations where parties compelled their members to sign a withdrawal form ahead or in advance. Why? Because the whole philosophy of leadership recruitment isn't rooted in merit, isn't rooted in competence, isn't rooted in capacity, isn't rooted in the belief that individuals should perform and represent their people. It is rooted in this primitive, very primitive notion and conception of what power is and how power should be acquired. And it's not necessarily about public interest, but about the domineering power and influence of a microscopic few. Because this political class that seem to have held us hostage are so small in number. It's just that they have, one, built patronage networks and have made people so subservient and subject and make them their subject. And so when people try to challenge authority, authority fights back. It doesn't engage. And this is the bane, of our problems that needs to be reversed. And so you need a new political class.
Let me take you up on that part about the people who capture this finite, minute, or rather minute number, small number. I'm very inclined to agree.
And by the way, it's not just political parties, because even in the civic space, there are also manifestations of this capture of whether civil society space or organizations. Those capture actually happen. So you ask yourself, is it about the political system or it's about we as a people?
Yeah, the part I wanted to take you on is the part about the politicians, even though I absolutely agree with you about the civic space, especially in terms of viewpoints and angles and leanings. I'm 100% in agreement with you. But let's talk about the candidates' recruitment. There was an attempt in 2021 when the Electoral Act it became the Electoral Act in 2022 was being designed initially. There was the attempt to make direct primaries the only way of recruiting or electing candidates in a political party. Mm-hmm. And yes, we know that governors kicked against it, a large number of people kicked against it, a large number of politicians kicked against it. But perhaps what surprised me during that process was that the discourse in the public fora was not particularly in support of the direct primary system. So is it just the...
I don't know why you were surprised. So let's look at this, right? The whole process of selecting candidates, it's a democratic, ideally should be a democratic process. Now, direct primaries isn't the only mode of ensuring that democracy of ensuring the democratic method of candidate selection. And so when you look at indirect primaries is also a democratic process of consensus building, because democracy is about consensus building, that we agree that this individual should represent us. Is consensus in its own respect. So indirect primaries are also democratic ways of building consensus, right? The challenge is the fact that we have so abused these processes, and these processes have been captured, by politicians at the expense of the people. So the people's will no longer prevails, because democracy is about the will of the people. Democracy is about the will of majority of members of your party. But our own practice, and particularly in the political parties, democracy is the will of the politicians, and not just the politicians, the ones who have the money, who have the patronage networks, and the oligarchs in those institutions. They are the ones who determine who actually emerges out of those processes. So it's a big problem, and I think the way out of this is, yes, the Electoral Act has got three options: consensus, that was introduced in the 2022 Electoral Act, but it wasn't an alien practice within our electoral system, and then indirect primaries as well as direct primaries. Yes, we've got those three different options, and none of these options is insulated from manipulation, and none of them is insulated from capture. In fact, a lot of this is built around culture, political culture, and the fact that the average Nigerian, and let me take it a step higher, the middle class have refrained from politics, because the delegates who are selected or elected from the ward at congresses, they are the people who are the lower bottom pyramid. A lot of them don't have, the kind of understanding that people who are middle class, presumably, do have about governance and how, government should work and function. Or should for them who are at the local level, they may not be as sophisticated. But it doesn't mean they don't know what they want. They do know what they want, right? But then you have a middle class that have stayed away from politics. And so you look at the delegates, who come to the city centers to vote, for candidates of their choice. And a lot of them are just up for grabs. So you have the delegates procurement happening during primaries, because if people like you, Buchi, go to your ward, contest to be a delegate, I don't think that 500,000 naira is going to buy you or buy your vote in the course of a primary. 500,000 is even too much, because what do these politicians do? They come hijack and kidnap.
They sequester the
let's not be too technicist about this. They kidnap, these delegates, take them to a hotel, accommodate them, ensure you feed them for the entire process. You pick them up from the hotel to the venue, and afterwards you take them back. If you don't protect the delegates, your opponents are more than winning. And so what happens during party primaries? It's actually a marketplace. It's about the highest bidder. How much are you going to give? And you see some delegates who were here just a few months ago, where people came out of delegates elections. They went back to their constituencies, and they used the resources that they got from the primaries to do what? To pay back to their constituencies. And also in some cases where one of the candidates who, after paying huge amounts of money, demanded for a return because he didn't emerge as a candidate. This is what you have within your political system. So long as there's poverty in the land, so long as a few, the top 1%, control the wealth and the resources, and there's no distribution of wealth, you're going to continue to have this kind of political system.
We've been talking about, or rather, you've been talking about the issues, some of the ways in which our democratic process is not giving us our required desires. and I don't want this to feel like a bit like a depressing episode. I want us to talk about.
I don't think it is.
Thankfully, I want us to talk about some of the green shoots, or what the way forward is. And one of the green shoots that I thought I saw in the 2023 election was a much more robust engagement, especially from the young people. People can ascribe multiple reasons to it, but it doesn't change the fact that we saw a very strong drive to go register, to participate in the electoral process and all of that. In fact, at nearly 40%, you have the people within the youth bracket now forming the largest voting bloc in the country. Is this something that we should perhaps be building on when we're looking at creating a new political consciousness?
No, I think that's what we experienced with the 2023 elections is really heartwarming. The enthusiasm, the interest that the election generated, it's a product of a constellation of three factors. The first is the new Electoral Act, the electronic and the introduction of technology, as well as new political actors who were on the ballot. These are the three sort of major reasons why you could see that interest, because people actually, Buchi, for the first time in a long while, I've seen Nigerians who won innocently and genuinely believed that their vote will count. This was one election. It wasn't there in 2019. It wasn't even there in 2015. There were some shades of it, but it was quite, unprecedented at this particular point. So it's so exciting to see, and that's what you need for democracy to actually survive. And so if you ask me where is the ray of hope, is this enthusiasm, this youth power, because we also have to give it to the young people. The young people who changed and shifted political debates, the young people who galvanized 9 million people to get on the register. These are the young people that we celebrate. The only issue is that this enthusiasm was not reflected in the turnout for the elections. And that is something that we need to chew on, we need to ponder on, because were there reasons? Did some people show up and they weren't allowed to cast their vote? Because there are cases of voter suppression, right? So that could be one reason. The second was a lot of people who registered couldn't collect their permanent voter's card. Maybe the turnout could have been higher if these issues around PVC collection were addressed or they were managed properly. The third sort of, reason is the fact that traditional voters would always vote at elections. Traditional voters would always vote at elections. For new voters, they are more likely to stay away, especially if after registration to the point of election, there are variables that discourages them from participating. Because for them, you are in a context and a climate where it is not mandatory to cast your vote, unlike other countries like Australia, where you have a responsibility, you're compelled to vote. Well, in this case, why should I even go out at the end of the day? So these are some of the things, but I think there's a ray of hope. And if there's one thing that I see that gives me hope, is that this election was also a referendum on some governors who thought that because they were incumbents, they were going to get to the National Assembly. The people's power prevailed and they stopped them from coming to the National Assembly. That for me is a sign of hope. If you look at the National Assembly, this is the most diverse National Assembly that we've had in history, because you have about 7 political parties represented in the National Assembly. That's also one of the things that gives me hope. If you ask me what else gives me hope, is the fact that for the first time in our democratic experience, we've seen more young people get into the National Assembly and in the State House of Assembly. We've seen young women win elections. The youngest legislator today in Nigeria is a young woman who is 26, who was 26 at elections at Rukayat in the Kwara State House of Assembly. But also that in the House of Reps, for the first time in our democratic experience since 1999, you have the young people who are between 25 and 29 in the House of Reps. and these are beneficiaries of not too young to run. There are 2 young legislators in the House of Reps. So are we on this journey? Yes, we're on this journey. Have we reached our destination? No, we've not reached our destination. But there are marginal wins that should really inspire us, that in the light of, this disillusionment, the state of the polity and the state of our politics, I think that there's a reason to be hopeful. And when we talk about, we run these diagnostics on our political issues and our problems, is to help the people who are following this program actually understand the dynamics, that you're dealing with complexities, and these complexities manifest at different levels. And what you need to do is a coalition of the willing, that the more complex our problem is, the more diverse the kind of people you need to actually address that problem. So it's not just going to be a function of political parties. Quite frankly, if there's one story that has come out of the 2023 elections, is the popular will and the power of the people, because it could have gone worse. This is the same election. When INEC said they weren't going to give people PVCs, or they had produced PVCs, Nigerians went to court. In fact, let's take it backwards. After the NSAS protest, it was Nigerians and young people, over 36,000 of them, who submitted a petition that got INEC to rethink a strategy. For the first time, there was online voter registration. In our entire history, for the very first time, it was this same citizens' energy that delivered the 2022 Electoral Act, because President Buhari was reluctant to sign the law. In fact, it was in this same country, the 9th National Assembly mutilated their report and removed electronic transmission of results. They deleted the power of INEC to review election results. This same country. Did citizens speak? They spoke. The National Assembly had no choice, but it listened to them. In fact, it is in this country, the Senate voted no to electronic transmission of results. The Senate was forced and compelled by citizens. They came back, reversed their decision, right, and voted in support of electronic transmission of results. So there are pockets of wins, and there are stories, of how citizens' resilience has shifted politics, has shifted the conversation. We just need to celebrate this more and encourage more citizens to speak out, to speak up, to ask the difficult questions, and don't be intimidated, by a section of the political class or their minions that they have all around, who would, go to any length to ensure that they suppress your voice. No, the strongest weapon that you have as a citizen is your voice. It's your vote. Speak. Ask those questions, because so long as you're a Nigerian, you are entitled to good governance, you're entitled to quality leadership, and you should demand for it. You're not demanding for too much. When you ask an elected representative how much they earn, you're not demanding for too much when you ask about the budget. You're not demanding for too much when you ask them to perform, the campaign promises or to fulfill the campaign promises that they made. No, you're not asking for too much. Actually, that's even your right. They should be the ones proactively reporting to you. But since that's not the case, you take up the responsibility to ask them those questions, because democracy does not equate election. If democracy is going to deliver to you as a citizen, it's going to take you actually speaking up. Else, it's not going to shift.
That's actually pretty brilliant. And from your description of all of these green shoots, I'd like to say that they're not pockets. These are entire shelves of hope. And so how can I agree? Crystallize it? I'm looking at the EU reports of the 2023 elections. One of the major recommendations that caught my eye is the makeup of the INEC leadership, which is vested in the arms of the executive. Is this perhaps one of the things that we should be engaging on in the lead up to subsequent elections? Because many people ascribe that to reasons for interference. Maybe that's part of why people don't trust the process.
Yep.
Even if there isn't, it's very difficult to not expect that there would be if the entire responsibility or control of appointment of these electoral officers is vested in the arms of the executive. Is this perhaps one of the things that needs to change going forward?
Absolutely, it needs to change. And you see, elections is a game. You have an umpire. It's just, we're just chit-chatting, and you said you're an Arsenal fan. Well, I'm a Manchester United fan. Imagine if we're going to go to a duel. We're going to go to a football match, and then you as Arsenal decided to use your Arsenal, to appoint the referee. Of course, the referee that you're appointing will be aligned, to you. You'll be more aligned to protecting your interest and not necessarily sticking to the principles of what impartiality. And so this is why Justice Ways Committee have said that you need to remove the power of appointing INEC commissioners, from the president, because the president is a leader of a political party. I agree with that, a particular proposition, that we need to review the appointment process, because when you see the appointments of these particular individuals, a lot of them, have partisan background. So that's one. The second critical issue is the fact that the constitution of the country places 2 criteria for appointment into INEC. Actually, let's say 3. First, it talks about age. The second condition is you must be of unquestionable integrity. The third one is that you must be non-partisan. Those are the criteria in the constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. These criteria are inadequate, and we've seen how we've seen them play out. Because Nigerians are not going to trust a process that is managed by people who should be umpires, but they are known to be partisan individuals. The last appointments made by President Buhari, if there's one retrogressive legacy that President Buhari leaves behind that has shaped our electoral process, is the last appointment he made. Because that's the same appointment that led to this electoral coup that happened in Adamawa, because that same individual was appointed by President Buhari. There's also a particular individual who, contested for governorship in one of the states in the Northwest. I was a member of a political party, but he was appointed, as a member of INEC. And so you can see, so that process needs to be...
we really jump in here because I like the fact that you mentioned the wreck in Adamawa State, right? Before the Electoral Act of 2022, one of the complaints that INEC had was, we need capacity to prosecute. We need to be able to punish offenders. But the Electoral Act of 2022 vests them with that.
They've always had the power, by the way.
Exactly. And I saw that, after the shenanigans that happened in Adamawa State, I could see what INEC is talking about, pushing the IGP to probe and to prosecute. If you have the power, why aren't you prosecuting?
Well, so it's the appointing authority. So for me, the deserving sanction for that irresponsible conduct and criminal conduct of the suspended rec is actually removal from office and then prosecution. But again, there are processes to this. Yes, investigation has been conducted and INEC is prosecuting, because the appointing authority, what INEC did was to inform the appointing authority, and in this case, the president, of this particular irresponsible misconduct on the part of your appointee, because it's the president that appoints those people. And this is why Nigerians need to pay close attention to who is being appointed into INEC. It's critical, because their independence and their impartiality and their capacity, needs to be guaranteed. And so INEC decided, to commence the prosecution, because the prosecution of electoral offenders, is vested within INEC. But the power of investigation lies with the police. So the police needed to conclude its investigation, and then the case file needed to be submitted to INEC. And that's where the prosecution, is taking place, because it's this entire system that we've created.
It doesn't particularly look like a workable system, does it?
No, absolutely no, it doesn't. But I think we also need to give it to INEC for prosecuting him as an electoral offender, because the REC is an electoral offender. But INEC cannot remove him. The best they can do is to do what? To suspend the powers, retrieve the powers, the delegated powers that the chairman has, is to withdraw that power and say, okay, stay away. But the actual person who has the power to suspend is the president. This is why that process needs to be subjected to public scrutiny. And I tell you, when these guys were appointed, civil society spoke. We submitted petitions against some of these nominees. The Senate didn't consider the petitions, went ahead, and screened, this individual, a lot of them, But the bigger issue is the fact that political parties were silent when we as civil society were speaking against these appointments. And so, as we move from the elections, political parties need to rise to their own responsibility because they are the first beneficiaries of a credible process. Therefore, they should be interested, in who gets into INEC. There must be people who have impeccable character, but you must also professionalize the appointments of INEC, especially at a time when you're talking technology, at a time when you need a diverse set of people with different skills in INEC. You need statisticians, you need lawyers, you need communications experts, because INEC has been grappling with the perennial issues of, communications. Imagine if you are appointed into INEC and you come with your experience and knowledge on communications, you're definitely going to revolutionize INEC's communication. So these are the kinds of conversations, we are having within the space on the need to professionalize this INEC appointment, but also subject it to public scrutiny. What I expect from President Tinubu is when there's a vacancy in INEC, the first thing he should do is to ensure that he makes appointments early. And secondly, before he sends his nominations to the National Assembly, ask Nigerians, tell Nigerians, these are the people you want to appoint, you want to nominate. Please, do you have any reasons why these individuals should not be appointed into INEC? Provide evidence and I would listen to you. I expect him to do that, perform that due diligence first. And then for the Senate, when you receive petitions from citizens and citizens group, please consider those petitions devoid of politics, but also issue guidelines to guide citizens, because one of the things the Ninth Senate did was they told us that the petitions that we submitted against those nominees were not accompanied by an affidavit. And it was the first time, when I read the report, I was actually stunned. It was the first time that we were told that to submit a petition, you needed an affidavit. Where is it actually stated? Well, of course, we know it's all of those politics, but these are some of the issues. But we need to urge citizens to keep an eye on who becomes the next INEC chairman, who becomes the national commissioners, who becomes the resident electoral commissioners. You need to speak out. You need to be vigilant, because these are the people that will determine whether your votes will count in 2027.
Okay, so no pressure then. No pressure. Well, this is actually a very good place to draw the curtain on today's show. We can talk probably forever, but I like that we're ending it with an analysis of what the green shoots are and, what to do going forward. Just to round up for you, Samson, what are your expectations in the next elections that are coming that it's off cycle? What would you love to see to attempt to infuse a sense of belief in the electoral process in the population? We have an election coming up in a few months. That's actually my state.
Well, are you sure you have an election? I don't think those three elections, we are preparing for war, because the electoral history of those three states, Imo, Bayelsa and Kogi, is one that leaves a sore taste in our mouths, and we have different experiences about those elections.
States.
Well, one of them is my
guilt
state.
is shit.
No, I don't think it's about the guilt. I don't feel guilty, because the people of Imo State, the people of Kogi State, the people of Bayelsa State are people who cherish quality leadership and uphold certain values that are central to our development. The values of integrity, patriotism. They are very good people. The big problem is you have a political class that does not care about those values. And when you have a political class that don't care about those values, they want to root everybody to support them in this, journey of perpetrating all forms of evil and malpractice. And so for good people who are in those society, I say to them, this is the time to rise up and say no. And the best way you can do that is to show up at election. If you sit back at home, these horrible people will continue to control the power of your state. The only way to get them out is to show up. Yes, you would say, but there's insecurity. How do we ensure safety? That is why before the elections, you've got to speak out so that both INEC and all the other stakeholders will prioritize the issue. There's power in organizing. But to sit back and say you will not do anything, it's not going to change, the status quo. And we've got to match our politicians with engagement for engagement, and we do so in a civil manner. Trust me, in these 3 states, there are about 5-point-something million people, registered voters in the 3 states. If 4 million show up in November to cast their vote, they're going to alter the balance of power. It just takes the courage, of showing up to cast their vote. And if you say INEC will rig the elections, it's difficult to rig elections compared to 1999, compared to 2007. And Nigerians and voters can make it even more difficult. Showing up. It starts with showing up. Staying away will give them the free space to do what they want to. That's why they don't want you to actually show up. And lastly, INEC needs to go back and distribute those uncollected PVCs. Those uncollected PVCs in those states, please go distribute the PVCs so people can. Yeah, absolutely, they can start now, because if you look at the margins of win in Imo, I think Kogi, there are 100 and something thousand uncollected PVCs, and so that's enough to actually swing the vote. So I'm aware INEC intends to go back to distribute those PVCs, but it should do so timely so that people can actually cast their vote. But I'm quite optimistic. Yes, the politicians are preparing for war, but the people are preparing to peacefully vote. And we have to encourage them to go and vote peacefully. And when they vote, they stay there to ensure that their votes actually count, and they follow the results, and hoping that the IREF, will work, and the INEC election results viewing portal will function optimally, because it functioned in the subsequent elections, save for the upload of the presidential election result.
Thank you very much, Samuel. Just to also add that there is also the responsibility of the executive arm of government and the security institutions, because, if it's not the presidential election, it should be a lot easier to keep people safe during the elections. If people feel safe, they're going to come out.
Yeah.
Thank you very, very much.
Always a delight. Thanks. And thanks for the great work that you do through this platform.
Thank you. And this is where we draw the curtain today on the big issue. We've been talking about elections, electioneering, and of course, how it affects our democratic process. I was joined today by Samson Itodo of Yaga Africa, and I hope that you've enjoyed what I thought was an insightful conversation. You can extend this conversation on all our social media handles. You can also go back and watch the rest of our episodes on YouTube, on Spotify, and of course on Google Podcasts. My name is Buchi, and it's been my pleasure being your host today.